Dr. Frank Hollenbeck from the International University here in Geneva is now a familiar face here on Dukas Copy TV, and he joins me once again in the TV centre to pick the bones out of last week's key EU summit. So thank you for joining me. What do you make of the reaction by the markets? There hasn't been a great sell-off in any of the stock indices. The euro seems relatively stable, so the leaders of Europe will be quite happy with that.
Well, let's say that what came out of this agreement last week would have been great if it had been put into place at the beginning of the euro, okay? And it's something that would actually have been okay if it had been put in 3 years ago. The problem is, how do you deal with the current situation? Just to give you an example, suppose these rules have been put into place at the beginning of 2010, okay? So Greece cut its spending, okay, raised its taxes, and its economy tanked. In other words, if these rules had been in place at the beginning of 2010, Greece would be basically in the same position it's in today, okay? And what's happening in Greece is they're getting to the point where additional austerity is basically now going to lead to additional revenues because of tax evasion and basically the tax revolt that we're seeing in Greece. So ultimately what was going to happen is Greece is going to default. It's ultimately going to go back to its old currency, which was the drachma. And what it's had is it's had to pay a price, which has been the last 2 years. It could have gone back to the drachma 2 years ago, and the situation would be much different today. Now, so the real issue is that, is Italy in the same position that Greece was just with a year delay? In other words, we're having a situation where Italy is also raising taxes and cutting spending, okay? And its economy is probably going to contract next year. But the thing is, it's doing it in an environment where all the countries are basically raising taxes. So what you're going to see is it's likely that the impact on Italy on its financial position is going to be a lot faster than in the case of Greece, because Greece was doing it in an environment where it didn't have every other country in Europe trying to raise taxes. So the issue is that in a year from now, is Italy going to be in the same position that Greece was at the beginning as Greece is today? And this agreement hasn't dealt with that particular issue. And that's really the big problem, is that this is fine, this is great, but it's not going to get us to a solution to our particular debt problem.
But the Eurozone leaders have clearly stated it's up to individual countries to sort their own finances out. And Italy also does have a much more robust economy than Greece. So if Italy can get its bond yields under control, surely it's on the road to recovery.
Well, basically Italy is at 120% debt to GDP ratio, same position that Greece was back at the beginning of 2010. And the austerity measures actually raised the debt to GDP ratios to about 163. So we can expect the same thing to occur in Italy. I mean, this agreement is fine, but how do we go from this agreement to where we are today? For example, France is going to have a budget deficit of about 5.7%. They plan to have something like 4.5% next year and ultimately get to 3% in 2013. Now, if we have a serious recession in Europe, which is almost in the cards today, then those estimates are going to be out the window. So ultimately is, when do we actually get to this agreement? And you have to be a bondholder. You're looking at yourself and basically you're saying, would I invest, if I'm a bank, would I invest in Italian debt today? And my answer would be no, because the downside risk is higher than the upside potential. Also, you have a situation where a lot of people are drawing cash out of banks, like in a lot of the southern banks. You also have the fact that banks have to increase their Tier 1 capital ratios. So you're basically in a situation where there's really very little incentive for banks to go in and invest in either Italian or Spanish or any other type of bonds. So like I said before, this is a great agreement. I'm just afraid that it will become moot within a 3 to 6 month period.
This agreement has made clear there'll be no repeat of the Greek situation where private investors holding sovereign bonds would have to take haircuts. So surely from an investment point of view, sovereign bonds are quite attractive at the moment.
Well, you're talking about first, let's talk about Europe. They're what we call a serial rule breaker. Even what the central bank is doing today, it's not supposed to be purchasing government debt. And it's saying, well, we're intervening in the secondary market. We're not allowed to invest in the primary market. But you have to understand that the primary and the secondary market are like congenital twins. If you intervene in one through arbitrage, you intervene in the other. So the basic point is that we continue to have a situation where we keep breaking our own rules. So you're basically telling me we put a rule into place where they're not going to take any haircuts. Well, what does that mean? Suppose Italy was to go to default tomorrow morning. Does that mean that the Finns have to pay this bond? Does this mean that the German people have to pay these bonds? I mean, this is even worse than a euro bond in the case that private debt holders would not have to take a haircut. And I think Merkel was the one who actually pushed for this, and I think they softened it a little bit, and they basically said they would follow basically IMF rules relating to how much of a haircut bondholders would be willing to hold. So in other words, like I said, there's first you're assuming that those rules won't be broken, and the problem is that it's almost a certainty that they will be broken.
Yeah, let's talk about Mario Draghi now, because he's now a very important key figure in this whole game. Is there going to be a moment where he has to intervene further in the bond markets, and what will that moment be?
Well, it's going to be very soon. It's going to be very soon, and up to now, their intervention has been sterilized in the sense that when they purchased Italian or Spanish debt, they basically sold German debt to basically not have the money supply change. The problem with that is that their balance sheet now is basically essentially Greek, Italian, and Spanish debt, and they're running out of other debts to sell. So ultimately, they're going to have to start monetizing this debt. And that is going to occur very, very shortly, I think. They either monetize the debt or we have a crash.
Yeah, so when you say monetize the debt, what implications does that have for the European Union, Eurozone?
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, I think I need to explain something that's very important. Why is counterfeiting illegal? The counterfeiter is happy. He gets the goods and services. And the store owner is happy. He's able to sell his products. So why both of them are happy, so why is counterfeiting illegal? You and I work for a living. Okay? We also take from the economic pie. In other words, when we pay our rent and when we go to the supermarket, but we contribute to the economic pie at the same time. The problem with a counterfeiter is that he takes from the economic pie, but he doesn't contribute to the economic pie. Well, central bank intervention is the same thing. It's basically what I call my oxymoron, which is legal counterfeiting. Okay, every euro that the central bank prints is basically reduces the economic pie for everybody else. So right now we have everybody is screaming, let's save the banks. It's basically the bankers are screaming, let's save the banks. The problem is the person who's going to pay for all this doesn't realize, he's not screaming because he doesn't realize the impact he's going to have. It's a mechanic who works 20 hours a day, okay, and then finds out that when he goes to the supermarket, he's paying 20% more for everything he purchases, or that his rent has gone up. He's not there complaining. He doesn't realize that if the central bank intervenes, okay, and starts monetizing the debt, it's going to be money into bankers' pockets, which will be coming out of the mechanic's pocket, because he will find that his standard of living has declined, even though he's working 20 hours a week, or 20 hours a day, I mean.
If we're speaking this time next year, what do you expect the situation to be?
Well, to be honest, I think that probably what you should ask me is, what do I think the solution is? I think we should have the European countries peel off. Okay. In other words, Greeks should go back to the new drachma. All they have to do is set a conversion rate. This would be a conversion rate for all the debt, and also would be a conversion rate for incomes and rents and everything else. So they set a conversion rate for everything. Now, this conversion rate doesn't have anything to do with the market rate that we're going to see for the drachma. Okay. Now, you have to understand that 90% of Greek debt is basically under Greek law, and only about 10%, I think, is under international law. So clearly, we'd have bondholders get a haircut, because the conversion rate would have nothing to do with the market rate. But then they would have to go to Greek court to get restitution from the Greek government. But what this would do is it would put Greece back onto the right path. Okay, and the thing is that I'm afraid that we're not going to do that. I think what we're going to do is we're so hard-headed in keeping the euro that it's somehow sacrosanct to basically touch this, that we're going to lead us down even further down the hole before we realize that these are the things that we have to do.